This is going to be one of the most important videos because extroversion and introversion is not only fundamental of the four Jungian dichotomies, but it's also one of the most noticeable. But Socionics doesn't approach extroversion as a trait that you have a certain quantity of, with introversion being the lack of that trait. In Socionics, extroversion and introversion are essentially two different vectors that you can apply to each of the four faculties. And as we discussed in previous videos, Jung outlined the original four faculties, which are still used to this day and still remain highly relevant, of intuition, logic, ethics, and sensation. But then he also laid out two possible attitudes that each of those four faculties can have. And those attitudes are extroversion and introversion. So extroversion is going to be looking at the external world. It is externalizing. The X in extroversion is a good prefix to use. It's pointing outward. And introversion, on the other hand, is pointed inwardly. And there are a variety of different words you could use to describe these concepts. But we could talk about Husserl's original definitions, as well as some more modern ways of summarizing these traits that are a bit more applicable to things we actually see in interactions. So for Husserl, she really wanted to get down to the metaphysical, fundamental property of these traits. And her original distinction for them was bodies versus fields. This is Husserl Augustina's original distinction, the notion of discrete entities in space as opposed to the fields that permeate space itself. In physics, bodies are objects with matter, mass, and other qualities that can be observed, studied, and discussed apart from the object. The fields are the realm of interaction between bodies. They are perceived through the subject by means of attitudes and cannot be studied apart from the subject. Extroverted functions perceive aspects of bodies that can be discerned in and of themselves, while introverted functions perceive fields between bodies where the interactions actually take place. It's important not to confuse this with static dynamic, though, because extroversion isn't necessarily looking at the external world statically. It is simply focusing on objects at the expense of focusing on the subject, whereas introverts are more so about their internal responses to objects and how that creates a relationship between them and the object. The subject is introduced into the equation more with introverts. But the other way to look at it is breadth versus depth, right? Extroversion is broad in its scope, whereas introversion is deep in its scope. So extroversion is going to be sort of scanning, right, but with a bit more of a surface level look at things, despite a broader range. Whereas introverts, right, they're focusing more on what they're working on. Their products are more dense. So on top of bodies and fields, you can also refer to it as objects versus relationships, which is a name that I think is also quite good at encapsulating the concept. It is sort of associating the concepts with energy and information. Extroversion is, in terms of one of its most observable attributes, more energized, or is injecting more energy into the surrounding environment, whereas introverts are more energy preserving. So this breadth versus depth theme, right, applies at both the informational level and the behavioral level. And that's why this trait is one of the first things you're going to notice when typing or just interacting with anyone, while keeping the existence of these traits in mind. So when you apply the trait of extroversion and introversion to the faculties, you would get NE or NI, TE or TI, SE or SI, FE or FI. It's important to understand how that trait is going to affect the fundamental mechanism of each of these faculties, right? So if you're talking about logic, introverted logic and extroverted logic are going to differ in terms of what one is trying to understand or do with logic. In the case of extroverted logic, they're trying to utilize the interactions of objects in external space to their benefit to facilitate practical ends, right? Like dealing with large volumes of stock information, or dealing with large volumes of resources being exchanged between counterparties, right? All for what? All for some practical endpoint, getting things from point A to B, getting projects off the ground, etc. As a result, it is more broad and more energized in its focus and activity. Whereas with TI, introverting logic, now it's more so about understanding how an object relates to itself, aka understanding the relationships between the components that comprise the object, its structure, essentially, right? So if we're talking about a car, TE is going to want to know, okay, what are the properties of this car that is relevant to the goals that I'm trying to actually, the things I'm trying to do with it? Does it get to point A to B efficiently? Is it reliable? What are the other metrics about this car compared to other cars that could help me make a decision about how useful this car is for me and whether or not I should pick it over other cars? Whereas TI is looking at the car itself. How does it work? How does a differential work? How does an engine work? How does the engine transfer power to the axle? Things like that. It wants to know the internal structure of the car itself to understand that object. So the relational component of introverted logic is within the object itself, whereas TE is just collecting factual information and then trying to utilize objects for practical ends. And the relation component that you may have picked up on TE in terms of comparing a car to another car comes from the other end of its axis, which is FI, which is then going to be about determining the value of something. So we talked about bodies and fields, objects and relationships, energizing versus integrating, the injection of energy into the surrounding environment versus preserving one's energy to attain a more holistic understanding of whatever it is they're working with. If we're looking at extreme cases, you could say that for extroversion, it sometimes focuses so much on the external that it is almost recognizing itself through its interactions with the external world, and is thus not as focused on what it itself may think about something or feel about something or react to something. As such, you can have a lot of extroverts who are constantly seeking validation from the external world because they can only feel recognized if they are receiving some external corroboration of their existence. Whereas for introverts, they tend to be much more in touch with what their own wants and needs are, as well as how to maintain distance between themselves and others, and having conviction in their beliefs, interests, etc., without the need for external approval. So far, we've introduced the Jungian faculties, which are intuition, logic, sensation, and ethics. Of the 4 Jungian dichotomies, those comprise the middle 2. So intuition, sensing, logic, ethics are covered by the faculties. And then, of course, perception and judgment is the root dichotomy from where intuition and sensing and logic and ethics come from in the first place. Once you introduce extroversion, introversion to the mix, you are now going to have the complete suite of dichotomies. You can derive all 16 types purely through them, but it's also now important to understand that this gets us 8 information elements. That increases the number of concepts that are important to understand from 4 to 8. Just know that these 4 faculties have 2 attitudes each, which get us 8 information elements. There are plenty of different examples we could use to exemplify extroversion versus introversion. But for now, think of something really obvious, like Donald Trump versus Aubrey Plaza. Even just simply in the way that they speak and look at the camera, you can tell a very, very stark difference in how they go about emitting their energy. That is a big part of what makes extroversion and introversion such a useful trait for identifying cognitive preferences and then measuring their actual emergent effects in behavior and interaction. As of this video, we have now already discussed the four faculties: static dynamic, extroversion, and introversion. And we're going to give plenty of additional examples as the channel progresses, but it's important to understand that there is at least 3 different sets of 4 concepts that are going to be key to understanding the IMEs. The next video that we're going to release is going to be on the 8 functions themselves. And looking at the previous videos, it will now put into context these 4 faculties, these properties of static dynamic, and then the attitudes of extroversion and introversion into the 8 primary building blocks of our complex cognitive processes.
I can't get these memories out of my mind, and some
Your Twitter handle is Evil Hag. Why Evil Hag?
Because I like it. I don't know, because why? Sorry.
Why do I feel like you're my daughter?
If I'm gonna be in this movie, I'm gonna play the girl that has sex with Robert De Niro.
Sure.
Because that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So,
With all due respect, thanks for being here.
Yep.
No,
You're
no,
welcome.
yep is not the correct response.
Oh,
Thanks for being here. Yep.
I can remember of it. I think I said thank you to Young Hollywood for this award. Thank you to all the young people. You old people. Old people can go themselves. I'm going to live forever. And then I walked off.
With that speech, how did it work out for you?
Just silence. There was a lot of young people there.
A lot of young people.
A lot of really young people there.
Right.
So I don't think their parents appreciated it.
Oh, okay.
I did it for myself.
And since then, I would say you've been on this show a lot. We've become pals.
Yeah.
Just say yes.
If, right?
Yeah.
If the world was I'm not singing to you, sorry. Is that embarrassing?
Please don't do that. Ever again. On behalf of Amy, I'd like to thank the devil and all the dark lords who
Don't do the devil stuff.
gave her this award
Don't do the devil stuff.
allowed her to feast on the flesh of the innocent.
Thanks.
And it's really weak to call John McCain a loser because he was a
I never
POW.
called him. No, I don't call
That
him
is
a-
outrageous. He's an American hero.
I don't like losers. But Frank, let me get to it. He hit me. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
I love the women that faint when I speak. Those are the ones that love me.
No, go ahead, Donald.
No, I'm a gentleman, Hillary. Go ahead. What I say is what I say. And honestly, Megan, if you don't like it, I'm sorry. I've been very nice to you, although I could probably maybe not be based on the way you have treated me, but I wouldn't do that.
Is there anybody you'd like to apologize to right now yourself?
No.
No?
Get him out. Take him out. Get him out of here. Oh, throw him the hell out of here. Am I allowed to rip that whistle out of the mouth? I'd rip that. Go home to mommy. I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. I don't throw babies out, believe me. I love babies. Actually, I was only kidding. You can get the baby out of here. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible. I always wanted to get the Purple Heart. This was much easier. If I become president, we're all going to be saying Merry Christmas again. That I can tell you.